Hi, this is Mike from Connected German again, bringing you another video. Today we're looking at separable prefix verbs. This is part one, little introduction. So we'll answer the questions, what is so special about separable prefix verbs and how can we identify them in sentences? Alright, so what you need to know, this is an intermediate video. What you should be familiar with is basic verb conjugation. Also, in line with verb conjugation, how it agrees with the subject and that it always agrees with the subject, and also what the infinitive of a verb is. So let's get into this. What is a separable prefix verb? Now, you may have seen these before and just not recognized it or not know that the grammar term is separable prefix verb. Or you may have seen this separable prefix verb in one of your textbooks, and you look at it and you go, oh wow, that sounds absolutely horrible. I don't even want to know what that is, especially those of you that don't like the grammar too much. But this is going to show that, separable prefix verbs, they really aren't all that special. They don't have any special meaning. Something does happen to them with the grammar, but first thing we want to do is be able to identify them and basically say what they are. Yeah, so basically what we're looking at is these are verbs that have prefixes that resemble prepositions or articles. Let me give you a few examples. Anrufen, which means to call, like you call someone on the phone. Mitfahren, to ride with, to drive with, to go with. Einschlafen is to fall asleep. And if you look at these verbs, without the prefixes, they already look like some verbs you may have seen. Rufen, to call, like to shout to someone. Fahren, to drive or go or ride. Schlafen, to sleep. So essentially, what's happening here is a lot of prefixes are stuck on already existing verbs. But does that mean that simply adding the prefix to them more or less means the same for the word? Not always. Although they are attached to verbs that are already existing, it doesn't mean that the meaning of the verb is going to stay the same. Or sometimes, in some cases, it's not going to be anything like it. But that's one indication of how we can start to identify these. Okay, why are they called separable prefix verbs? So in some instances, the prefixes that we saw, that I had in bold in the previous slide, can separate from the rest of the verb. And if this does happen and the prefix is separated, it means it goes to the end of the clause or sentence. I'll give you some examples here. Here's one. Anrufen, to call, as in on the phone. Ich rufe meine Eltern an. We see that the verb anrufen has a separable prefix of an. And we see that highlighted in red, both in the infinitive at the top and in the sentence. It's separated and it goes to the end of that clause, or in this case, it's the end of the sentence. Notice how the verb, the rest of the verb, aside from the prefix, still gets conjugated according to the subject. Normal rules here. Typical ending for ich on verbs happens to be e. Okay. Will this prefix always get separated? No. In fact, it's only going to get separated if that separable prefix verb is the only verb in that clause. Now let me give you two examples. First one, as we saw in the previous slide, Ich rufe meine Eltern an. I call my parents. Anrufen, which I've highlighted in green, is the only verb in that clause. And in fact, it's the only verb in this sentence. So, yes, it is a separable prefix verb, and yes, it's the only one. So those are our two criteria. It does get separated. Here's a second example. Ich rufe meine Eltern an, wenn ich die Zeit habe. Essentially, the first clause here is the same as the first example. I call my parents, and then the second clause, when I have the time. Notice here, in green, we have our verb in the first clause, still anrufen, to call. And we notice that in that first clause, it is in fact the only verb. So it still gets separated. Yes, you do have another verb in this sentence, but it's happening in another clause when I have the time. And since our other verb, habe, is in a separate clause, it doesn't affect the separable prefix verb in a different clause. So that's why, notice how I didn't put an at the very end of the sentence. That's why I mentioned right here, it's the only verb in that clause. So look at the clause, this first one, where a separable prefix verb occurs, and in that clause, anrufen is in fact the only verb. It meets our two criteria. Is it a separable prefix verb? Yes. Is it the only one in that clause? Yes. So it goes to the end of the clause. How we identify these? We want to look for verbs that appear to have prefixes that resemble indefinite article, the indefinite article ein, as well as prepositions. Here are some common prepositions that are used as prefixes in separable prefix verbs. An, auf, aus, bei, mit, nach, zu. Oh, that should be durch, not furch. Should have a D there. And very common prepositions or preposition-like prefixes that are used in separable prefix verbs. Another thing you want to do is, if you look at the whole sentence, look at what looks like it could be an indefinite article or the indefinite article ein or a preposition at the end of a sentence. That should be a clear indication. Now in English, we're told, even though it's common to use prepositions at the end of a sentence, like where did he go to? Or what kind of car is she in? I mean, it's technically not correct, but in German this is enforced a lot more in regarding how it's actually used. German clauses and sentences never end with articles or prepositions. So if you see something that looks like this, an indefinite article at the end or seemingly a preposition at the end, it has to be a prefix that's been separated. It's a part of a separable prefix verb. And again, this isn't just in the grammar, like in the grammar for High German that you learn when you're a kid. This is this rule that clauses and sentences never end with articles or prepositions. That's what is actually used in everyday speech. So it's a very good indication that you have a separable prefix verb, and that thing at the end is a prefix. So what we're going to look at in part 2, now that we've seen a couple examples, is how do we use separable prefix verbs together with modal verbs and other helping verbs. So that essentially means that we're going to have more than one verb here again, but because we have an additional helping verb, that means we're now going to have two verbs in the same clause as the one that contains the separable prefix verb. How do we deal with those? And I'm also going to give you a short quiz. I'll give you some sentences and you tell me, should the separable prefix verb be separated or not? Alright, well, this is intro for separable prefix verbs. Stay tuned for part 2 coming up soon. And also be sure to stop by connecttogerman.com for more videos on grammar, culture, conversation tips.